Good evening, and welcome to the Tri-Board meeting of the Select Board, Finance Committee, and School Committee being past 6 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order for the Select Board, and then I'll turn it to the other committees to call their committees together. So the Select Board convenes its meeting.
The AFC convenes its meeting.
School committee convenes the meeting.
Great. Christy, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Christy Williams. I serve as your town manager. In addition to the folks up front, we also have several of our department heads in the back who are here in person. We also have several who are watching online. Understanding that this meeting is really important in terms of setting the tone for fiscal 27, and we're about to ask department heads to start to put their budgets together, so wanting to make sure that they're aware of all the questions and concerns that are raised today. We always start this meeting with information about the closeout of fiscal 25. So fiscal 25 concluded on June 30th of 2025. We have not fully closed out, so some of these are estimates, but we are estimating about $12.6 million in free cash, which is less than we had the previous year. $126 million operating budget, about a 5% increase overall, and about a 5.43% increase to the average single-family tax bill over fiscal 24. When we look at our local receipts comparison, these are our revenues that come in that reduce the levy, and you're seeing that most of them have experienced growth, whereas a couple of them were actually lower than they were the previous fiscal year. We've talked a lot about revenue over the past couple of years, so I just think it's important to see that they do fluctuate and change. These are not comparisons to our estimates, but they are comparisons to the year before. And looking at our free cash use, the blue line is the free cash, so just under 14 million at the closeout of fiscal 25, and then we used about 3.5 million in town meetings during fiscal 25. This is your first look at our new benchmark communities. And so we are looking at the percent change in average taxes from 2020 to 2025. We picked this data point because we really wanted to look at the growth from COVID, because I think a lot of communities were coming back from COVID at different rates. So in looking at this, Westborough is second from the top at just under a 26% increase, with the middle number being that 22.16 in North Andover. Looking ahead to fiscal 2026, that's the fiscal year that we're currently in right now, and so began on July 1st of 2025. Each of these slides is going to show a gray bar and a green bar at the end. So the gray bar is indicating what we were estimating at the annual town meeting when we approved the budget. The green is what we're estimating as of today, and then, as you all know, we won't set the tax rate until November. So we're looking at a slight increase in the average single-family home value. So around annual town meeting, we were looking at about 801,000. Now we're up to 803, and we're also looking at a decrease in what we're estimating the average single tax bill to be. So going from 12,981 to 12,907. That's similar with when we look at our average single family increase. So going into annual town meeting, we were estimating $663 increase to the average single family. We're actually below 600 as of today at that 593, with an increase of 4.82%. Some of the things that have contributed to this have been revenues coming in higher than anticipated, also our growth number being higher than estimated. When we're looking at our excess levy capacity, we had estimated using about $1.5 million of our excess levy capacity, which means that we were that we were outside of Proposition 2.5. So we've talked about that. That means that if we were at our levy limit, we would have required an override when we went to the annual town meeting in order to pass this budget at the same level. As we've moved forward to this budget summit, given some of the changes that we've experienced, we're actually looking at a growth in our excess levy capacity of about $300,000 from last year. And then as we look ahead at fiscal 27, we're just wanting to talk about getting set up for that budget and some of the things that we consider when we're going into the budget. You've seen this slide from me many times. These are all guiding documents. They're ones that have had an incredible amount of community engagement in their development and are guiding the town, the department heads, in the creation of our budgets so that we're achieving goals that were set by the community. Every April, following the annual town meeting, the select board holds a retreat where they establish goals for themselves as a board, as well as myself as town manager, and that certainly guides the development of different budgets throughout all of the departments as they all participate in some of these items. So I know that we were talking about them last year. There was a question about where these existed. They are on the website. We've been doing this for several years and really wanted to bring that, highlight that for this group. When we're looking at anticipated impacts for FY27, there's a lot that we don't know. We have not asked any of our department heads to put forward any budget numbers, but we are able to make some assumptions, and we are able to identify some numbers based on policy decisions made in the past, as well as contractual obligations. So just sort of level setting, we always ask for a level service budget. So that's a budget that's likely going to be higher than the budget that was previously provided in the current fiscal year, as opposed to a level funded budget. We want to know how much it's going to cost us to continue the same level of service. What's not in my presentation, but I have presented on it previously, is that if a department wants to add a service, add a program, add staff, they have to submit a separate document with backup as to why. And then we go through that in a priority basis, identify which goals we're addressing, which guiding documents we're looking towards, why we're looking for that program. And then we highlight those for you in our budget document so that you can see very clearly what funding is going towards something new. This is one of the policies that has clearly identified an increase to the tax levy. Back during COVID, or I should say prior to COVID, we were funding our OPEB liability at $1.1 million a year. That number came straight from a health insurance savings that was achieved in 2014. And so we were able to maintain that contribution to our OPEB trust fund until COVID, when we reduced that down to zero, with the intent to build back up to that $1.1 million level. When we came back with this proposal, it became part of our comprehensive fiscal management policies. So it went to the Finance Committee for recommendation to the Select Board, and the Select Board ultimately adopted it. And we have successfully adhered to this funding schedule. So in fiscal 27, we'll raise and appropriate $800,000 and contribute $200,000 of free cash. So we'll have a total of $1 million in contribution to the OPEB trust fund. Another thing that happened for the first time during COVID in many years was the use of free cash to lower the tax rate. These numbers look sort of random here, but they really were, because when we initially started looking at the budget and wanted to lower the tax rate, the free cash amount was $1 million. And every time we would achieve savings, we would lower the amount that we were using of free cash so that we were not creating a structural deficit. We were able in fiscal 22 to bring that number down to zero due to a significant increase in our state aid. And then we used, again, the same method in fiscal 23, trying to mitigate the impact to the taxpayer. We've maintained at this $450,000 number since then. And so you can see here what it would be without the $450,000 of free cash and what it is with the use of that money. It is a structural deficit, and it is not consistent with our comprehensive fiscal management policies in that we would prefer not to use it, but it is an excess amount of free cash, so we are able to use it to lower the tax rate. If we were to eliminate that use of free cash, we would have about a $55 increase to the average single family. And then that $200,000 that we're increasing the OPEB contribution is about $25. So we know going into fiscal 27 that if we do both, if we follow our fiscal management policies, we'll increase the average single family by $25. And if we go down to zero in our use of free cash, it'll be another $55. Some budget assumptions that we've made. You can see here when we look at our fixed costs, we looked at several different factors to estimate for fiscal 27. With our debt, we actually see we're estimating a reduction in our debt. That's based upon forecasted debt and understanding all of the debt that we currently are carrying. We have a lower increase to insurance this year, but looking at the prior 3 years, we're estimating a 9% increase. Electricity is at zero. We actually were able to get a very favorable rate on our new contract for electricity, and it's actually a little bit lower than the previous rate. So we would level fund that. And then Assabet and Worcester Regional, again, those are based on historic trends. Looking at our union contracts, we did last year when I came before you, we had several union contracts that we were in negotiations with. This year we've settled clerical, DPW, dispatch, and police supervisors, so those are all settled through June 30th of 2028. We are working to settle the police patrol union contracts, and then we also have the firefighter union contract that will expire at the end of this fiscal year. But when we look across our salaries and expenses and our current contracts in place, we're estimating about $875,000 increase to our total salaries, which is about $108 to the average single family, and expenses. That increase, again, is based on historical trends. And then the fixed costs is which I already showed you. So estimating at this point, based on several assumptions, an increase of about $484 to the average single family. This is the second year that we've actually put numbers out with budget assumptions. Last year, we were putting forward an estimated impact of about $683, and we came in lower than that. This is just an illustration of our debt, showing that we're in compliance with our fiscal management policies, inclusive of the debt that we've taken on and will continue to take on related to the library. So this is our budget process. Again, we kick off tonight with this tri-board meeting. And one thing that has changed from some of the other slides that you've seen that have illustrated the budget process is the capital budget. So the capital planning, we actually had them, those were all due to us on September 15th, so much earlier than previous years. I'll go here. So we have our 5-year capital plan plus our 10-year capital outlook, with the idea that we're looking at this long-range planning, we're understanding our capital needs now and into the future, and then we can identify funding sources for these, inclusive of our capital improvement fund, free cash, raise and appropriate debt. So looking at all of those, so those are all, we've received all of those and they're all coming together. And we will come to you with a full plan when that's completed later this year. Allison?
Go. Oh, that one's okay. I thought I saw that. Everyone's so quiet.
I know, so let's stare at you while you fix the technology.
That's good, it's good. Let's see. Let's see if it actually worked. Entire screen. Look at that, okay. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Christy, and thanks for having us here this evening and for gathering all together. It's nice to be back this year and have been through it one time and have a little sense of what this is all about and where we're going next. So, you know, I am going to kind of provide you a very high-level look at where I think we are and what the different levers are that are going to impact the school side budget this year. First of all, just taking a moment to pause and brag a little bit, because I think that's important. This is a town with an extraordinary school system that's important to the people who live here, certainly. My favorite one of these is Boston Magazine's 2025 came out with their list this year, and Westborough made it in the top 10 bang for your housing buck. So I thought that was nice. That's exactly the kind of place we want to be listed, for sure. Kind of where does the money go on the school side? And you know this and you've heard it before, but the overwhelming kind of majority of our dollars go into salary. Right now, it's about just shy of 81% in salary. And so when we talk about kind of the budget often and trying to figure out what to do about the budget, often we have to sort of really focus on salary in order to make any substantive change in one direction or another, whether we're adding staff to add programming or reducing staff in order to kind of mitigate impact. I am going to kind of speak a little bit to that salary percentage a little later, but like I said, 81 is about where we are now. The drivers, in addition to enrollment, which drives our salary numbers because we have to staff to meet enrollment, are also programmatic. We have to sometimes shift what we're doing in terms of meeting the needs of children, and those needs are shifting all the time. We have to kind of be mindful of the fact that educating kids right now is very different than it was 20 years ago. In addition, special education is our kind of most unpredictable part of the budget, and I'm going to show you something in a little bit that shows the sort of school budget escalation you've seen in recent years tracks exactly with increases in special education, out-of-district tuition, and transportation costs. So it's highly correlative. Our staffing models, we have to kind of look at those all the time to make sure we're maximizing impact. Service contracts have been a tough area for us to absorb because we don't control that. So, for example, I was up here last year saying we have a bus contract to negotiate this year. I didn't know how that was going to come in. It didn't come in great, but it could have been worse, was kind of where we landed. The good news is years 2 and 3 of that contract are significantly lower. So as we look at projecting for this coming fiscal year, FY27, we will not be taking the big hit that we took this past year. And finally, facilities and operations, the upkeep of the buildings and the grounds and all the things that go into making the school environment work for kids. So my note here, salary has decreased as a percentage of the overall budget, which also kind of gives you a sense of what's happening in schools, that we are kind of, like everyone else, buffeted about by inflation and other kinds of drivers. So even last year where we cut positions and a number of positions, our budget still is large, and part of the reason for that isn't about staffing, it's about other factors. So the variables we are looking at this year, first and foremost, collective bargaining. Will be entering into bargaining. We've actually already started with the Westborough Educators Association, but almost all of our units will be bargaining this year, so that should be a piece of the puzzle for us. We do have a decline in enrollment. I'll show you that. We talked about that last year. We've seen this sort of slow, steady decline. It's a little more of a decline this year than I anticipated, not sort of hugely substantial, but we'll be taking a look very closely at where those numbers fall to see, are there places where, just like last year, we might be able to make some changes in order to sort of maximize our use of staff. Out-of-district costs are continuing to climb, and finally, I think the big unknown for us is federal funding uncertainty. We currently have about $1.3 million that come in through federal grants, and a number of those grants are in kind of a very uncertain status, and I'll highlight those in a minute. So enrollment, I mentioned, is down. You look, that top line is overall enrollment. Now, I will say again, and I said this last year, this is not a very dramatic enrollment change. It's sort of a slow, steady drip. And in fact, the delta between where we are now and where we were back in 2016 is not that much. So we are seeing a little bit of an up and down wobble. But that number, that was a few weeks ago, we'll be rolling out our official enrollment information at the next school committee meeting to look at in detail so folks can see sort of just where the numbers are down and just where they're up. This, by the way, reflects a wide trend that's happening throughout the state. This is not unique to Westborough. Many, many, many communities are seeing a decline in school-age children enrolling in public school. This is a major challenge for us, and it's an important one. So, the good news is that this district has built out special education programming that is very strong. We keep the overwhelming majority of students here in district. We are proud of that. We feel like we want to make sure we keep kids in their neighborhood schools to the extent fully possible, and we've invested in a lot to make that happen. However, from time to time, there are students whose needs cannot be met within the school environment, within public school, and those students are eligible to be placed in either a private or collaborative placement in a specialized school. Those placements are very expensive and they add up quickly. And if you notice, since 2021 and 22, they have jumped, and in particular, the cost of transportation has jumped. So the red up there is transportation, the blue is tuition, and that is going to correlate almost exactly to sort of, if you look at what the escalation points are in the school budget over the last few years, they directly align with this cost. I mentioned federal grants. We take in a lot of money currently from the federal government. It kind of filters through the state and gets to us in all these different categories. I've highlighted in reds the ones that I suspect are highly vulnerable looking ahead to next year. This is just, me kind of doing what we do at this meeting, which is trying to project what might happen in the next little bit. I'd say we feel fairly certain that IDEA in the early childhood will remain intact at least for the short while, but I also feel fairly confident that some of these others are going to disappear. And in fact, 3 of them, Title III and Title IIA and Title IV, were almost clawed back this year and then released later than we thought. So for a moment there, we thought we had about $130,000 deficit coming into this year. In that IDE grant in particular, which funds support for students with disabilities, a fairly large portion of that grant is tied up in salary. So we have about $930,000 in salaries. If that grant dries up, we have to go find that salary money elsewhere in our budget. Okay. Kind of looking ahead, history and future outlook. If you look at this kind of past 10-year look back, you can see, again, fiscal year 22-23 tracks really closely with special education, tuition, and transportation. So those did an uptick, everything else did an uptick right around the same time. The salary, again, as a percentage of the budget and driving the budget has decreased overall. Transportation costs are up, out-of-district tuition costs are up, and the other thing we're kind of looking at, too, is our facilities. We do have facilities that are going to need some care and attention, and that's important. We want to make sure we do that in a timely way so we don't get caught having to do it in an emergency way, which is not super helpful. A couple things we'll be thinking about in terms of revenue. We surfaced the idea last year of some fees that maybe we haven't had before. We're one of the only communities in the area that doesn't currently have bus fees. That's something we'll have to look at very seriously this year. Busing is a wonderful thing to be able to provide free to the community. That may not be tenable in this sort of fiscal climate. And another piece of this is just continued advocacy, making sure that we are out there talking to our legislators about the importance of funding that supports the schools so that we can kind of continue to do the job that we do on behalf of Westborough's kids. And that's it from me.
I think we wanted to give this year a more brief presentation to leave room for the boards to have time for discussion of budget goals. So I think before I move into that, I have a couple of slides to set up that discussion, but if anyone has any questions for myself or the superintendent, we'd be happy to answer them.
Did the number you showed in your roll-up of guessing what, estimating, sorry, next year's amount, did that include an amount for the schools as well?
No, that was just, that was exclusive of the schools.
Okay, so,
That 400 and,
Yeah.
yeah. So that does not include the schools. And I should also say that it does not include any estimates for the patrol union or the firefighter union because we haven't concluded those negotiations.
okay, yeah, it's just good to
Yeah.
know that.
Yep.
So Christy, that 484 per household, what percentage increase would that project to be? You just went
Do you have
by
a percentage increase?
Right.
For 484? Do you know what that, we can get that. Yes.
I have another question regarding the allocation of the free cash in the earlier slide. I was wondering if that is a definitive decision that has already been made, or is there any contemplation of, rather than using it to reduce tax, perhaps using it to reduce the anticipated debt for fiscal year 2026, which I think you said was around 11.92 million, or perhaps looking at some of the needs of the school budget. Has there been any thought around that? And unless we can't do crossover allocations across budgets. I mean.
Sure. So technically, free cash can be used to lower the tax rate. That decision, I guess I would say, is not definitive. That and because it's applied just generally against the costs, you could say it's applied across the board. So to debt, to schools, to all of our revenues. I think that that's one thing that I can't remember if the slide's still in here. No, maybe not. I think one thing that we really want to stress is that all of our revenues go to lower the tax rate across the board. So if our licenses and permits comes in higher, that means less on the taxes. If Chapter 70 comes back higher, that means less on the taxes. So until our revenues exceed our actual budgets, there's no extra. It's just used to lower the taxes. And that would be the same if you were applying free cash against operating expenses. That being said, and many of you have heard me say it before, that is not good fiscal management because it creates a structural deficit. But to answer your question, no, it's not determined, predetermined, and it does apply across the board.
I was happy to see the schools presented sort of the risk profile for federal funding and potentially, I guess, state funding as well. I didn't hear anything in your presentation. Is there any sense that you have state or federal level?
We're working on that.
We're not as at high risk as the schools are in terms of federal funding. With most of we have one position that is funded through a grant that comes through the state, and that's our sustainability coordinator. I guess that's actually not true. We also have several part-time positions in the senior center that are funded through a grant, but again, that's a state grant. So to the extent that those come to them through federal funds, that would have to be, that could be a concern, but has not been raised. I will say that the town is very aggressive with its delegation in pursuing earmarks, and we have pursued. We were awarded 3 earmarks in this current year's budget, and all of them are being held till October and will likely not be dispersed because of what's going on at the federal level. Also, I think we've all talked about the possibility of having, I think we called it a efficiency study or something between the town and the school through a grant funding. There's that entire grant funding program that has funded many of our opportunities through the years is also not included in this year's fiscal budget for the state.
Thank you.
So I had actually a couple of questions. In fact, I want to congratulate for the fact that we have been able to negotiate a good electricity. I honestly never knew that electricity could be negotiated as well. I always thought that they were just going up, up, and up. So great thing on that. But also that raises a question for me that from now until the next town meeting that we have, is there any scope of, I know that we have negotiated on our insurance. I know we have negotiated now on electricity. We haven't touched upon, because I remember in the last budget, legal expenses was a big portion of our increase as well. I haven't seen that covered. So are you anticipating anything less or more on the legal expenses as well? And is there anything on the, anything else? Are there any other avenues that you have identified where now until the next 6 months you would be negotiating something on getting favorable amounts there as well?
Sure. So let me start by saying that the electricity contract that we're in is through, is it mid fiscal 28? So that is solid for all of fiscal 27. And when we do lock in, we have the opportunity to lock in at different rates or with different contract terms. And that's something that the select board looks at, and then we are able to move forward with. And so this was the most favorable. And that brings us into another fiscal year, which is great. Really, health insurance is negotiated annually, so that's required. These are only one-year contracts, so every year we work with our health insurance consultant to look at rates, and we're experience rated, so a lot of it depends on sort of the activity of our members and their families. And then also there's a lot of pressures just in the world of insurance anyway. And so our assistant town manager is attending a conference tomorrow to learn more about all of the pressures that we should expect in next fiscal year related to insurance. But last year, I know I mentioned the use of GLP-1s has been a driver in terms of the increase to insurance. But again, that's negotiated every year. If we want to make changes, we work with our insurance advisory committee. And we always bring the new rates to them to have discussions, and that's made up of all of our unions as well as one retiree. Legal, yes. So we actually have not gone out to bid in several years for legal expenses. We've been very happy with the service that we've received from KP Law. It's not the sort of increase in legal fees, it's not an increase in what they're charging that's been driving that budget. It's the litigation that the town is involved in. And so that's why we've come back several years in a row asking for reserve fund transfers or interdepartmental transfers, or even to town meeting asking for money for that budget. And so as those lawsuits wrap up, we would expect to go back to a more normalized legal budget.
Sorry, apologies. One other last question I had. I'm sure for legal expenses, I think there could be attorneys who are willing to take lesser rates, so maybe we could explore that. I don't know. That's something I would just
Sure.
let experts go for that. But the other question I had was on the tax rate. So now that we are starting to see the federal tax rates coming down a little bit, slow by slow, hopefully more, who knows, but will that impact our debt or fixed expenses as well? The debt as well, where the rates come down, we can refinance or get better rates?
You want to speak to that?
Sure. They're not tied directly as closely as like a mortgage rate would be. It's much more tied to the bond market. We borrow every year. So we have financial advisors that keep an eye on that, and we consult with them frequently throughout the year so that we can have an eye on what other communities are getting. Having our credit rating as good as it is carries a lot of weight. We do the S&P call, and every year they're pleased and want our debt. So it's a good thing. But I expect if the federal rates start to come down, if the Fed reduces them, that it will trickle down. We've been getting very good rates as it is, sub 3%, so on our short term.
We also consult with our financial manager before, when we make our estimates in the budget, in addition to as we get closer. So if that's what she's seeing in the market, then we're able to estimate lower rates.
Thank you.
On our long-term debt, that typically is not refinanceable, correct?
There is a process to refinance it after a certain number of years. We'll start looking at that in a few years. We don't have anything that qualifies right now. It's a question I ask every year, and we'll stay on top of that as it comes.
Thank you.
Quick question, kind of silly, but do we have any status of what the Regal Theater is doing or what's happened to that? Is it still
So
in
that
litigation?
it remains in litigation. You can see it all on the select board agenda. There's 4 lawsuits related to that property on the agenda. So I think we all have a shared goal of getting that wrapped up as quickly as possible.
In the public statement that's posted to the web, is that from April? I think was the last time we could really
Oh, maybe,
state something publicly.
yeah, the summer, I think.
I just have a question about, because it was brought up, it's interesting about the pending litigations. One thing to think about is I know that we seem to be happy with the services we're getting from the current law firm, but it's also, law firm to law firm tend to have philosophies about whether or not to drag out and get into litigation over things versus settling them. And I'm just curious if anyone's looked into the practice of that firm. We want to make sure that we're limiting our exposure as much as possible, and to be increasing that budget is something that we can potentially control if we have parties who are working diligently to limit our exposure. So I just want to make sure that that's being looked at.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I guess what I can say is that the select board has met with town council several times on other issues, and we have moved to settlement in some cases. So it's definitely, both strategies are examined, but it's a good point that we'll take.
I'm going to jump from the joyful subject of litigation and just say that this is the first time I've been through this. And I'm pretty amazed that the people who did this last year were able to get that close last January, I guess, to what the actual tax bills are. I mean, I think it was within $100. And I feel like the fact that we're here 2 months after the fiscal year starts, are we going to have a meeting next week on the 28th fiscal year? I just feel like it might be time, given the uncertainty of the state and federal funding, to push the town meeting back to May instead of having it in March, so that some of the question marks that we see that early, having a town meeting, one of the earliest in the state, some of those question marks might not be question marks, they might be certainties in our planning. So again, I commend the people who worked on this budget last year for getting it so close, but it is a moving target, and 6 months between, anyway, point made.
That's a good segue into the next part of our presentation, unless anyone has any other questions.
I do. One last question. I thought it was interesting when you showed that the enrollment has dropped, I think it was between 2017 or thereabouts to 2024, 25, and so within the context of that and looking at the potential increase in bus fees, I was trying to understand how the decrease in enrollment might correlate with an increase in bus fees, and then if any thought has been given, or perhaps I missed it, on where and how the funding for the increased bus fees are being thought about.
I think, bus fees came up last year as a potential just strategy to reduce the overall budget impact on the school side. And again, usually they are a mechanism many towns have used, which is if you are living, if you're outside the age limit where we are legally required to bus you, then there's a fee assessed per household. often with financial aid built in and things like that. So we can't have it be prohibitive to kids getting to school, obviously. In terms of declining enrollment, that's almost a separate issue in my mind. With declining enrollment, we need to look at our staffing, frankly, to see, are we staffing in a way that meets class size guidelines? And if we're doing that and there are opportunities to consolidate classes and still remain within guidelines, which is what we did last year, we should do that. So it's a potential savings. And on the other hand, we have a potential revenue source. So both things that can kind of mitigate the impact of a big budget. Yeah.
But you don't see the capacity needed for buses to be impacted by the declining enrollment?
It is a district where there's very heavy bus use, particularly because of the kind of configuration of the schools. Mill Pond, everybody's got to get on the bus to Mill Pond practically. So it's a place where, the spread of the district is a factor as well. Bus fees are tricky. There's a sort of tipping point. You have to set them in the right place so they don't tip over to a moment where people decide it's not worth it and everybody drives their kid to school. So, which we don't want that. That's a traffic problem, an environmental problem, and doesn't actually do the job of the fee generation too.
Great. So again, we wanted to leave a lot of time for discussion of budget goals, and just in order to set that up, we've identified sort of 3 different types of goals. The first is level service, which is really the current way that we operate, where we ask town, school, everyone to put forward a budget that maintains the current level of service, understanding that the level of service that the departments provide has been derived from potentially requirements, but also the service that the community has asked for. And so the second is Prop 2.5, which in this community, because of our excess levy capacity, we don't talk a lot about, but I think that that's something that sets a budget goal across the entire state, which is an increase of 2.5% plus new growth. And so that does not result in a budget that increases 2.5% because of our new growth. And I'll show that on a slide that I think will illustrate that a little bit better. And then targeting a percentage increase, which is similar to what we did in 2014 when the select board was looking at a budget increase of no more than 2%. So just sort of thinking about the level service budget and sort of what happened last year. With our level service budget, one of the risks is that the level service budget comes back, and even though it funds all of our services, it comes in at an amount that's higher than we would like to put forward to the taxpayer. And so just as a reminder of what happened last year, there was a request to reduce the town budget and the school budget by the 1%. And so there were several things, and this is just a slide that I had showing where we had reduced, and that it was inclusive, just like Allison brought up earlier, was inclusive of taking away staff, as well as other budget reductions. When we look at the Prop 2.5% or the Prop 2.5 as the target goal, what we would, if we were to put that in place as a goal for the budget going forward, even though we're not at our levy limit, you can see here that we have only exceeded what's allowable under Prop 2.5 twice in the last 10 years. So that was in 2019 and then again in fiscal 25. So that means that when you think back to our budgets, they certainly went up more than 2.5%. But if we were at our levy limit only in those years, would we be required to go for an override, as an example? And that's because our budgets went up and our budgets went up such that it exceeded the 2.5% allowable under Prop 2.5 and also exceeded what was allocated under the new growth. I think one slide that we've shown before is our excess levy capacity, and I think one thing that we try to communicate is that our growth of our excess levy capacity shows fiscal restraint, because when you look at other communities and when we've shown you slides of us against our comparative communities, our Our bar tends to be significantly higher than other communities who might not even have excess levy capacity. The excess levy capacity is showing what the town could have taxed legally under Proposition 2.5 that chose not to tax that amount. And then this is just an example of when we were targeting a certain percentage. So it worked out great in the first 2 years. But as you can see, it's not something that we've been able to maintain going forward. And so if you're thinking about targeting a percentage increase, there needs to be a lot of discussion and thought given to what we're basing that increase on. So again, these are sort of 3 different options for budget goals. One thing that I wanted to highlight too is sort of the risks of each of these goals. So again, putting forward a level service budget, the risk is that we'll be in a position where we were last year, where we put forward a level service budget, but folks were uncomfortable with what that meant in terms of increase to the average single family. Prop 2.5, that goal, or if you want to think of it a different way, if we're sort of chasing an amount that we're comfortable with, so say we all think that $300 is comfortable and we should seek to only increase the budget so that the increase to the average single family is $300. That's very difficult and one of the reasons that that's difficult is for the exact reason that Mark just brought up, which is we're creating our budgets a few months into the next fiscal year. We're making assumptions when we're halfway through the next fiscal year, and we need to be conservative in what we're estimating at the annual town meeting in March, because there's a lot of things that we don't know. And what we don't want to happen is what happened in fiscal 19, when town meeting approved a budget that they thought the impact was going to be $508 to the average single family, and it ended up being, I think, $794 to the average single family. And then the last risk for the targeting of the percentage is that that targeted amount may not meet the needs if you want to maintain services. So there's certainly risks to all of them. I think we wanted to set up the discussion because I think one of the things that we all acknowledge is that last year when we had this discussion in January, it was pretty far into the process and made it difficult, I think, for everyone as we move forward. So we're hoping to set the stage for that discussion to at least begin this evening. So with that, I'll leave it to the chairs of the committees to have that discussion. Thank you.
On the risk that you have identified for the 3rd bullet point, target percentage increase, could this still be mitigated by coming to the finance committee and taking off the free cash if, let's say, there is a need for the service to be provided? Could it still be mitigated, or there's absolutely no scope of mitigation? I just want to confirm that.
So I would say that whatever goal is decided, there's always flexibility in that goal. If we are coming forward with something that's critical or that the community has identified as a priority, then certainly I would expect that there would be adjustments made. I would again say that the use of free cash to try to mitigate that is going to put us in a position where we're funding operations through one-time revenues and put us in a structural deficit. So I don't believe that should be the mitigation. I think really it should be a thoughtful conversation about what the community is really looking for and if they're willing to pay for that.
Got it. Thank you.
Just in response to that, my concern would be that it would become a popularity contest and of decision-making and be taken outside of the legislative process that we have in our town.
Thank you.
Kristen, do you mind, I think that we have as a town, we have decided that there's a target budget increase that we've talked about. Could we just put that out there, even though we haven't really hit it? And I'd love to know how from the select board, they've addressed that in terms of what their expectations and planning are with you for the goal.
You're talking about the 2%?
2%.
Was it 2%? I thought it was like a little more than that.
No, it's 2%.
2%,
Yeah.
okay.
I think I'll speak to it. I was the only one on the select board at the time, but and was one of the architects behind this, and what we realized is it doesn't work. So it worked for 2 years and felt great, but 2%, and we excluded new growth from that, so it sounded good. But we just as you can see here, have not been able to achieve it. So it's a goal that I think we have to think the 2% was thinking Prop 2.5, let's cut it to 2, not include new growth because we know that moves, but it became very restrictive in terms of, you can see the size of cuts that would need to be made that the legislative body and other groups weren't comfortable with. So that's where it was, but we've kind of fallen away from that as even a finance team, just because it's been really unachievable in terms of where we are.
I think also, the fact that we were able to meet it in the first 2 years is indicative of what the fiscal reality was, not just in Westborough, but across the state and probably across the country at the time. If you look at where inflation is now compared to then, I certainly don't have those numbers, but all of that plays into how much is a realistic increase. I certainly wouldn't advocate for revisiting the goal annually, but I do think that we need to apply those fiscal realities. The superintendent was talking about contracts that they have for food service, transportation. We have similar contracts for, public works and public safety. So all of those have inflationary adjustments that need to be made. And if all of those are exceeding 2% and the cost of living is exceeding 2%, 2% isn't a realistic goal.
Thank you.
It's also my impression about that time is we may have underfunded some of our infrastructure that we seem to be lately doing a lot of things, fixing. And I wonder how much that goal contributed to not bringing forward some projects in a timely manner.
Chris, I just have a question, but before we go to the goals there, but just can you go back to the 3 goals that you at least introduced to spur discussion? And on the Prop 2.5, and I think it was on your risk slide too, but because I'm struggling, and you talked about last year, and we talked about this now. We do this so early, so I agree with Mark. When we changed this once before, when we saw that the state was going through problems, and many of you may remember it, that we moved to a May town meeting for a few years. What we realized, though, that was the state wasn't finalizing a budget till late June or sometimes into July. And that was the big reason at that time that we were waiting to see if we had a better, more solid estimate of state aid. And what we realized is we probably weren't going to get that final number until the end of June, and we couldn't wait that long to set our own budget, and felt that March, always, people like the March town meeting. We seem to have a better turnout than we did in May, but I think that's, again, a discussion that the town should have and we as a board should have. But to that point, on something like level service, I think, is one you can just say, let's go in level service. We know what our services are today. You can put a budget together, you know a number. Prop 2.5, as you mentioned, though, we don't know our final numbers regarding Prop 2.5 until we set our tax rate, which usually happens in late October, early November every year. I guess the question is it possible to set a budget goal? As a question to you, but also a question to all of us, to set a budget goal that we may not get close to finalizing until, say, October town meeting, which has kind of been our final wrap-up before we do it. But that, if we were above it, do you say, okay, let's wait till we see how we get final numbers like we saw this year? Like, we could have made cuts to get to 2.5 and then realized that without those cuts, we would have made the 2.5 goal this year. If I saw that slide correctly, is that accurate that we would have?
Yeah. So so if we were going into annual town meeting and the goal that everyone was expecting was that us to meet was to stay within Prop 2.5, then we would have had to cut $1.6 million out of our budget based on the estimates that we were making at the time and some of the unknowns. Fast forward to today, we actually are meeting Prop 2.5. So I think to answer your other question, things that we would know, in January, we get our assessments from Assabet, Worcester Regional. We're always sort of, because we're experience rated with our insurance, typically the more experience we have, the more favorable rate we'll get. That's not a guarantee, but that's what we try to wait for. So we're always sort of waiting to finalize our insurance budget. And then with debt, we borrow in March. So we're trying to move that date, but we don't want to move it to make it so that we have these numbers too early if it's not a favorable time. So we're trying to make it a little bit earlier so we're not sort of all budgeting. I mean, that's what we were doing last year. We're all budgeting towards this estimated number, and then it comes in a lot better, and it changes the sort of picture. But to answer your question about October, I think for us, for those things, I don't think it would be difficult, but I expect the schools would have a difficult time making changes in October to your budget.
With the current timeline and calendar, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
If I could just offer one other thing in regards to the Prop 2.5, we don't finalize our new growth until October. And one of the things, the big swing relative to the levy capacity impact was new growth. So typically, for years, we estimated new growth at $1 million. Recently, we increased it to 1.5 million. Now, our new growth in the last 3 years has been over 3 million. But you only have to go back a few more years before that, where it was 1 million. So it fluctuates dramatically based upon what's being constructed, based upon new companies in town, what type of corporations they are. And so it's impossible to really accurately estimate that earlier in the year. Personal property is 65% of our new growth. Their forms of list, which is where they report their personal property, isn't due until March 1st. And then we just get to work on it. So it's a real challenge to hang your hat on that because new growth is a huge variable when you consider Prop 2.5 and how you stay within it in the same year.
I think that hearing John say it's been 3 million the last 3 years, the thought maybe is that we should just increase what we're estimating for new growth. But as John said, it's really dependent on what's going on in terms of development. So there are communities that have thought a really big, name that facility is going to come in the next fiscal year, and then it doesn't. And you still have passed the budget, so you have to meet that requirement. And that means that deficit is put on the taxpayers.
Yeah, so I just feel like I remember when town meeting was moved, and the primary reason to move it to March was to increase attendance. And I don't necessarily feel like it's accomplished that goal. I feel like any increase in attendance is based on the subject matter of town meeting and what warrant articles are drawing attention, and not necessarily related to the time of year. And my feeling are that the benefits of having a later town meeting outweigh what I think are non-existent benefits of having an earlier town meeting.
I have no concerns. I think that's a discussion. I have no concerns with this town meeting. I would say a little bit inflation.
Fair enough. But, I mean, I think the later the better. Gives just a little bit, even a marginal increase in certainty or probability or whatever word you want to use, so that we can be as accurate as possible, knowing that it's going to change once the tax rate's set, but as accurate as possible. And again, I'm just really impressed that we were as accurate as we were last year, and I'm not going to take any credit for that because I wasn't on the board. So.
Actually, I think that's a discussion to be had. I don't know unless others, I think that's a mitigator, but it doesn't, I guess the question is, does it change what the goal is? If we said, hey, we're going to move to it, I don't know that we can do it for this year, but that would be a discussion whether we can have that change made in time. But I think it probably requires a town meeting vote, which we wouldn't get for now. We could do a special, or we'd have to wait till the following year. But anyways, I guess I'll bring it back to where we started and look at my fellow chairs here to bring it back to kind of open it up to a discussion here, which I think is what we're looking to do about some options maybe for budget goals, talking through these three, or if there are other ideas folks have in terms of trying to help our professionals here with beginning the budget process. So I will open it up to my board, but also I think for all of us here as the tri-boards to have that discussion.
I have one question. So currently you're operating on a 1% reduction compared to last year. 1% reduction compared to the originally proposed budget. That's the case, right? So I'm wondering what has been the impact on the level of services on the town side as a result of that change of 1%.
Our biggest impacts have been, at this point, the finance department. So we had a 25-hour-a-week position. So we no longer have that position. So now we close the office to the public on Mondays. We've received a lot of negative feedback on that. In the health department, we haven't funded the administrative assistant position, so we have no one in the front office. All the other people who work in that office are inspectors, so every time they're out on inspections, we close the office. Except that we have our planning department, we have half the time of their administrative assistant that comes, so 20 hours a week, we're able to have someone there, but we do frequently have to close that office. And then in the planning department, that leaves them without someone half the time. So those have been the major impacts. In our office, we also eliminated a position, which has been difficult, but not as high a priority for restoration. Currently, we're with the reduction in hours for the library custodian, with the fact that they're in temporary location, we're able to manage that, but something that we would want to talk about when they move back to their own building. There's certainly things on this list that we don't anticipate ever coming back for, and that's a result of other things that we've done. Some examples are the Harvey Building maintenance, because we're moving to the Regional Emergency Communication Center. That building doesn't require the maintenance going forward. The mini bus drivers, we have the WRTA Mobility Management Program now, and so we don't anticipate any restoration of that as an example. So I don't know if you want to answer, Allison, for the schools.
Sure. Just as a reminder, we eliminated Mandarin in grade 7. We reduced our technology budget by $100,000, increased class sizes in grade 5, and increased. We reduced our specialist staffing at the elementary level, which has made scheduling very, very tight and kind of difficult. Those are sort of the big hits. I think the one that felt the worst was really the Mandarin class. We also did have to constrain some elective offerings at the high school in English and social studies.
So just a follow-up question. So if you were to go after a budget that's below the level services budget, what would take the hit again in that kind of budget?
Can you repeat the question?
Wait.
Could you repeat the question?
Right.
Yeah, just closer to the,
Yeah.
just talk
Okay.
closer.
So my question is, if you were pursuing a budget that's below the level services budget, what would be the impact on the services at that point?
I mean, it would be the same exercise as last time, but just like the school department, the majority of our money is spent on people. So we would have to look at reducing positions again to have any sort of impact, depending on the numbers that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's kind of early to be talking about what specific, I think the point of this meeting is to figure out, do we want a level services budget, or do we want a level funded budget, or do we want to, as a group, target reinstating some services that were taken out of last year's. So I think that's really what we're talking about, and once we come to a consensus, we need to kind of stay with that. I don't want to say regardless of the consequences, but as we go through the budget process, not change our mind and say, well, we said level funded or level service so I would lean towards level service, but we said level service in September, and then in January say, well, no, we need to do level funded instead because the level service is too much. Or if we say, yeah, let's try and target reinstating some services that were, pulled out of last year's budget. Let's not change our mind and say, well, that's too much, we need to go back. Again, I think that's really the goal of this meeting. At least my sense of it is.
I think that, we had, the exercise that we went through last year was an important, meaningful exercise. I think that it was all well-intentioned, and I think everybody is trying to minimize the impact to the taxpayer's pocket. And I understand that. I think all the boards did their best at that time to be transparent, come forward and see, what we could do. And because of that, we took a hit to the level services. And I think that, especially from the school side, I can say that we've received a lot of negative feedback about the removal of Mandarin, for example, and the impacts of that. I think that a lot of people, we know this, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but at the same time, people move to this town, a lot of them for the schools, and a lot of people do. And I think that it's really important that we take the approach that right now, we're negotiating contracts, so we have to sort of see where we land on that. That's like, an unknown at this point, very early to speak about that. Allison's team is working hard to see where there can be consolidations made, if it's possible to do so, knowing and being very transparently open with you all about the decline in, enrollment and how she's working and the team is working to try and see how we can take advantage of that. So I also think it's a little bit early and premature to be talking about, certainly I think the conversation should be more about, are we able to do more at this point, or are we going to have to actually build back more of what we had taken away last year? So that would be what I would have to say.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
So for me, if I think about it from a tops-down approach, right, we're talking level service versus level funded, but we don't know what that answer is. I can't, in my mind, understand what is the difference and the impact on the town. So if you think about level funded, so if I take level service and then I take away from there things that we know is going to happen, right? So you've got many contract negotiations happening between the schools, the patrol, the police and the fire, and you pull that out, what does that leave you with in terms of what is the increase that's going to, I would say that is going to happen no matter what. And then you say, okay, if it's X dollars, then from those dollars, is that a fixed stuck cost, or can I adjust those, and how do I creatively be able to offset some of that increase? Because I don't think, sitting here looking at $500 a household increase for next year is good fiscal management.
Well, I think that's just the town side. That doesn't include the school.
Yeah.
But I think the number there is to
The
about
$484.
$4 million
Yeah.
increase. So level funded would be $4 million decrease. And I think you hit on some.
Service,
For
level service.
the level service, that's the number for level service.
Yes.
So in other words, if you want to do level funded, that 484 alone, forgetting about the schools, because that's not even included in that, that 484 would have come out of some other part of the budget.
Right, which in dollar amounts is it's $4 million.
Or if you take that $4 million, you take out the patrolman and the fireman, because that's a contract.
Those aren't in there yet. Those are not in there yet.
They're not in there.
Because we haven't negotiated yet. So again, thinking of salary, so we would,
Yep.
because what's in there on salary, those are the contracts already negotiated, which are 2%, 2 or 2.5% increases.
So
Level funded would mean we couldn't fund those. I'm not saying we have to eliminate.
it's basically fixed. It's a fixed thing that's going to happen, $500.
It's already been, yeah, contracted.
Unless you do things very dramatically different.
Correct. I mean, we can, I mean, it's the town's decision. The town can absolutely go level funded. We absolutely can do that.
Right.
But I think it came from Allison and from Christie. It definitely will be dramatic cuts in staff.
The other thing too
Would have
is
to be.
how do you do this like in a and I'm asking, how do you do it in a vacuum without looking at our competitive towns to say, okay, where are we relative to them and how are we managing, what services are we providing versus they're providing? So you can say, hey, you know, the $500 is rational and it's realistic and it's defendable. And we can go to town meeting and say, this is, you know, the right number for us to live by.
Well, it is a question of services, though, because to level fund,
Yeah.
services would be drastically cut. And if the town votes to do that, what cuts would follow? I don't know. It could be we don't plow the roads, or we don't fix potholes, or we don't have police officers patrolling the streets, or, I mean, there's a lot of bad things that we're talking about with level funding that would not make me very happy. So, I mean, I come to expect a certain level of service from the town. So I just don't know how to balance that and make that easier.
Without knowing, you know, how to compare it, right, to
Well,
like
I
town.
do think we have a brand-new set of benchmark communities, and
Right.
maybe Christie could show that again as to where we stand on that, and, I think,
Because then you can, you know, then you can, you know, people or townsfolks who, you know, are struggling to pay their taxes, you know, and come to us and say Westborough taxes are too high. You can defend it and explain it in ways that they can understand it, and you can intrinsically say, yeah, this is, you know, a good amount of money that we're paying for the services that we as a community want. And you put that thing up there, right, in terms of how do we desire our community to look like?
So I think a couple things. So we always show our benchmarks. We always show our data dashboard communities. Unfortunately, you're sort of looking in the rearview mirror because that's how you collect. You can't collect the data until the communities have completed, you know, their budgets or their fiscal years. So this is looking at fiscal '25. We don't know what their single-family increase is for '26 yet because most people, like Westborough, haven't set their tax rates yet. In terms of just, I think what you're describing on a programmatic level is exactly what we do, and I'm sure exactly what the school does in terms of looking at, I mean, we all, I think, are part of different associations where we're always looking at what other communities are doing, how they're approaching different issues as things come up, and how they're using their resources and spending their money. So there's always that sort of looking across the boundaries and trying to understand how we can do things better. I don't know that drives the whole budget discussion because you're doing it as you're developing these programs.
Right, but this is an increase, right, over time period. Yep. But if you look at more of a composite stack bar, so what am I paying for my services, or say it's my tax rate, so whatever my tax rate is, relative to all the other towns, and look at it on a stacked basis.
Yep.
So I can see the stack bar.
Yep.
So I can see how much am I paying for police? And then you can say, well, ours is very different, or fire, right? Because we know we cover 495 in the Mass Pike.
And some have volunteer fire departments too,
Yeah,
so.
so then you can kind of say, okay, I understand why I'm paying more for certain services than others.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly put that together based
But
on the
until you know
previous
that,
fiscal
how do you
year.
know?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I recall that we talked about, first of all, I do think it would be helpful for everyone to refresh themselves about the new benchmark communities in the presentation that was given to the board that talks about the different comparisons that ultimately resulted in the creation of these new benchmark communities. So we should all refresh ourselves on that. I believe last year when we were having the budget cut discussions, there was a fair amount of discussion around, and Terry, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but like, what does level funded look like? and what does level service look like? Not in big numbers, but in sort of people relatable to the taxpayer, right? Because this is not always, we fly by these slides and people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, so level funded, we'll use the police example, just, that means we would have theoretically, and again, part of the challenge in all of this conversation is I have no idea what kind of work this creates on the part of the folks over here to do an exercise, and I think this is where we landed last year, that we're not really serious about as boards. Like, is anyone really serious about a level funded budget? And if we're not, then we should just say that and move to a level services discussion with maybe some level of scrutiny around, is there any way to maybe keep that super tight? Because that has to be a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak in broad strokes. We ran these numbers last year because of the conversation that was happening, and level funding last year would have resulted in the cut of approximately 50 positions, 50 positions from the school department, which is a devastating level of reduction for any school system of this size.
Right, and then it goes back to what Sarah said around kind of expectations and what Mark said. So I think I understand I love the bar idea, and I thought we did have that. That would be, I think, helpful for folks to understand in their tax dollar, like what percentage. I know, Christy, you put up the slide at the end of the year, what percent.
But to your point too, is what are those practical levers you can pull? Okay, so we know you've got fixed costs going up so much. What is it we can possibly do differently, creatively? I know you're gonna be looking at this as, you're struggling with your budgets, but what are those things that can potentially offset those increases as well? How do you look at things differently or whatever? But that kind of fits that gap as well. And then you can go back and say, yeah, the level funded makes no sense, but somewhere in between maybe.
What I would say, and I'm not saying this should be a foregone conclusion for this year, but 1% was brutal to get to last year. I mean, we felt it, we heard it. I know the schools certainly heard it. It was not easy. So I can't even fathom level funding. At the same time, I look at this and go, that's not a good run rate for 25 years.
And I agree with you. Level funding probably makes no sense at all, right? It's not even a scenario that you want to talk about, but it's hard to figure out then what is the right number. Is it 1%, is it 2%, is it 3%? But until you kind of know what costs you have and how you can manipulate them, how do you know what that number should be? In trying to set that tops-down approach that you're trying to do.
And I think I think most people are, how do I want to say this? I think that the granularity of the conversation sort of we're asking for here at the end of the day when we all wash it out, I think that either folks land on two different sides of the conversation, if you will. I want the same level of services, roughly speaking, regardless of where they're coming from, or I want lower taxes and I'm not really worried about the details. My opinion from what my conversations have been. And I think it's our responsibility to kind of thread the needle to land somewhere along the lines of, because I think we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what 50 teachers fewer or 5 fewer, 10 fewer firefighter and police or DPW. Like, no one really understands that until their pothole is being fixed, until the plows aren't getting there until the next day.
But I also think that doing that, I think to your point, Shelby, about doing the exercise, if we're not serious about it, we have to think about how that impact is to staff. So if we're talking about, if you're asking Allison to cut 50 employees, she has to identify where those cuts are. So, and same, I don't have the number of employees, but it has a chilling effect. Like we put people's position, we can't, as on the town side, we can't just sort of generally say the number of employees because we have to tell you like what department we're cutting from. So, and some of our departments have 3 people in them. So it's just a chilling effect, I think, across the board on both sides of the street. If we're putting up budgets that are cutting millions of dollars. And I think the other challenge is, you know, Terry, you just said $500 is bad fiscal management, but what's the right number? I mean, if that's the cost, I think there's just this perception that we have all this extra money in our budgets. And I think we showed you last year that that's just not the case.
A question, what type of value analysis, outcome analysis has been performed with respect to the budget? And it's something that I just observed last year, that while these sort of blanket budget cuts were reported as being anticipated, being performed, what I didn't see was the value framework used to identify where those cuts should be happening. And I think it may be helpful because just for pedagogical purposes, I'll use the school budget. Perhaps there's a $1 million expenditure, but in reality, that $1 million expenditure may not be resulting in a rate of, you know, math performance, English performance as anticipated previous to that $1 million expenditure, whereas a $20,000 expenditure may have resulted in far greater value. It depends on how the value would be defined, of course, and that would be up to, you know, the respective groups. But I think that type of granular analysis needs to be performed, and I think that that may open up new opportunities for cuts that may not be so friction-laden as just blanket staff cuts. And additionally, if you can couple that with the outcomes that were achieved in prior years before and after, I think that would be helpful, and it would make it more clear and more justifiable whatever cuts may need to be performed.
So a couple of things. One is in our budget document, we identify performance measures and where we've fallen on those. And we've also identified requirements that each department is required to perform. But I think we did have some conversation about value. And I think the challenge was, you know, which departments do we not have to have? What services do we provide that we are okay with getting rid of? So here's a great example. In 2020, we didn't fund hazardous waste day. And then when we brought it back, because it's $20,000, we said, we're gonna put it in an article and we're gonna see, does the community wanna pay for this? And some people don't care, but some people place a very high value. And I think that that's where the challenge becomes, you know, we're serving, you know, 20,000 people, and they place different values on different things that we're providing in our services, and I think that's true for the schools as well.
I would say that the value definition, what I mean by that here, is something more standardized and lends itself to more rigorous analysis. The value, it's not a value where somebody in the audience feels that there's value to something. It's value that is defined and identified, let's say, by the school, or it's value that's defined and identified rather by the, you know, select board, let's say. That is a definition then that would be put forth to show the corresponding budget and how the value is delivered by those allocations or the removal of those allocations. It's not a conceptual like artifact that would be determined by just a town member. It's something that you would use as part of your analytic framework.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to quantify everything that the town provides when the fire department responds to an accident or a fire and saves a life, well, the casualty rates go down. So was that money well spent or not? I mean, we can't, the only way to find out is to cut the fire department budget and see if the casualty rates go up. You know, I mean, again, that's a drastic example, but it's kind of, I mean, I understand what you're asking, and maybe there are some things that are measurable that we can point to, but there's some services that we may not want to find out the results of cuts because they're not going to be
I think the school actually provides a richer environment for that kind of analysis. But even in the case of the fire department, for example, and we would have to look at it, and speak to those that would know far better than I, but, have the rate, the severity of the fires, has that increased, from year to year? Or, the frequency of fire reporting, is that a measure that can be used in a meaningful way? So there are it's not that fire department would not be a sacred cow. I'm confident that there are metrics that we can use to show the impact of cuts or lack thereof, for example, and the value being delivered in the status quo.
Yeah, I just an example, I know the fire chiefs here, one of the things we look at has looked at is response times, and we know that a response time, because fire and ambulance, if your response time is longer for certain things like heart attack, you most likely will die, or your family member will, versus what we're able to do. So we can absolutely do that and say, okay, you're gonna go from, a 5-minute time from when the call comes in to a response to the scene to 8 minutes, 10 minutes, but that is, we can do that. It's probably, in many cases, a matter of severity of the results,
Yeah,
or severity of a house fire if we can't get there, or we don't have the staff, so we can't have, I know times when I've met with the fire chief, for example, where he had to leave a meeting because we had no one else to staff a fire truck besides the chief, which really isn't fully the role of the chief, but you're going to do that because you don't say no to helping somebody. But I absolutely hear the point in thinking of values. I think I've heard a couple of good things here, but I think it's figuring how we get there. I think is a big deal, and I think there are, to be clear, and if you're talking about big cuts, it is going to hit our big departments, of which there are few. Schools, of course, but on the town side, we've shown, but even cutting, we cut one person in the town manager's office, and then we had our one other assistant in there that left for a new job, and the town manager and assistant town manager swapping off, answering phones, and doing administrative work, taking minutes. We were behind on minutes. We get open meeting law violations because we're not, so we talk about litigation, now we're getting sued because someone's watching us to make sure that we post meeting minutes. It's those things that we have to think about that, and we want to do it, but it's to also realize there's a lot of services, and think about, okay, there are some things contractually we're required to do. So if we only have 2 staff people, or we have whatever in the finance, we can't. Some of us will say, hey, get rid of the finance department, because then we won't charge taxes, because we have nobody to charge, no one to do a bill, and no one to collect it. So maybe that's the answer.
Just to finish that point, I only wanted to say this, when you made great points. And so if we're talking about the response time, and we think about budget cuts, let's say with the fire department, then I would be interested in seeing what are all the activities that cost money? And of course, every activity costs money, but let's just say, for the purposes, what are the activities that are costing X, Y, Z, but don't impact the response time at all? And then we reduce those, versus what are those activities that absolutely fundamentally impact the response time, and then hopefully we can deprioritize or make them a lesser candidate for reduction. And I'm really oversimplifying to drive the point home, but I think you get it. And similarly, with the school versus let's just, I think it would make the school's situation, the fire department, police, what have you, the arguments could be stronger, but it would also give you opportunities to see where should you really be making the cut, so that, you can uncover other things, but more on that.
Can I speak to just one issue on the school side? I think we do want to, and I am hoping to be able to look at sort of data and performance data as sort of a driver of what we do and how we do it. I think that's responsible, that's good leadership in schools. One of the challenges we face is trying to figure out what did the work. It's such a the number of things that impact student performance are vast and variable. And so trying to isolate what is actually doing the work. Is it the overall environment? Is it culture and climate? Is it a particular instructional strategy? Is it curriculum? Is it kind of a staffing model or support? So we really do try our best to sort of track what's happening in terms of performance data. It's a challenging thing to actually have a direct correlation, we did X and it caused Y, and to be certain. Nevertheless, I think the point's well taken that where we invest our dollars should be where we see kind of impact happening in a positive way for students. We're certainly committed to trying to do that to the best of our ability, and kind of looking at what research says has an impact and putting the money there. So thank you for putting it on the
So
table.
a question, so then, and this is addressed to both the school committee, then also to John and Christy. So if you look at like scenario modeling and say, what is it within a range, and don't even worry about one particular number, but within a range, what seems realistic in terms of a proposed budget for next year, knowing what you could possibly affect. Then you could come back and say, okay, doing scenario modeling, and you can do it on, like 2 or 3 different drivers. And then you can say, okay, it makes sense that we can, grow the budget and or the tax rate by I'll make it up, 0.5% to 2%. And this is what it means. But just at a very high level, without getting into all of the details around all the detailed line item budgets, because you can get stuck in in that line item, as opposed to say, where do we really have flexibility, and that hopefully will set sort of a parameter for the budgeting cycle. And that's why I'm kind of struggling right now is, what is the right number? Well, you don't know, right, because we don't have enough information yet.
You have a comment, I know you've been dying.
Many, but that's right. No, please.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Thank you. So a couple things. The notion of having love the value tracking, the biggest concern, because we're so small, is that the same people will be measuring the values as the ones who are defining them, and that immediately becomes a concern of, like, not that you can't trust them, love you, to be clear, but that's an immediately suspicious way of running an audit, But I think that what I struggle with most mightily is that the whole level of service is that we bundle a whole bundle of things into service, because DPW isn't a service, it is 50 or 100 things that they do. And I think that what we don't have the visibility to in a clear and comfortable way is to say, hey, these are the services, and which one of them may we have some more flexibility with. And I realized, like, when we came at this a year ago, we really didn't have a lot of time to do that. So maybe we're in a better position to do that now. And in a perfect scenario, there'd be ability to say, instead of paving 600 miles of roads this year, what would it save us to do 300? But it's not going to be that simple, because we're such a small town, and so much of this stuff bleeds over. But surely the people who know this best, and we hire the best people, man. I've never worked with other people in this department, in this town, who haven't been like really on top of it. So they are best positioned to say, not just this is our service. I know they fill it out in the annual budget and they say this is what we do, but let's put some thought into this costs this kind of money, this costs this kind of money, and then we have a conversation about, well, maybe we can do a little less of this and a little more of that because that's what the town wants. And we can explain that to people as to what's being given and taken in terms of making the decisions we do. So my plea here is add some texture to what we call service, because I think Christy was one who said it a year ago when we were in a FinCom meeting, and the problem is not that we have services or that we even just have level services, we're always adding. But the problem is we're never taking away, and not taking away important things, but not taking away. And I realize you have a slide with a bunch of things where we work on that. But again, if we're doing this holistically, let's get a good view as to the kinds of things that we can make an informed opinion and argument about, like things that we could take away.
So I just, when you say we don't take away, I mean, there were multiple positions cut, right? And what I don't understand, and what I think, as costs go up, and over the last 5 years, costs have skyrocketed, right? We have tried and tried, at least my perception is that this group has tried to cut as much of the non-cost, over, whatever word you want to use, overhead, but to cut as much as we can from the budget and not affect the services significantly. Now, it's not as simple as going, well, I want to have the best school, so I'm going to spend this much, but I'm okay having the second best school, so I'm going to only spend this much. Maybe I'm okay having the 15th best school, so I'm only going to spend this much. And there's no like dollar correlation to that kind of, I'm okay having the 5th best, police department 5th best, fire department 5th best, school department, and so on, and now I'm going to save everybody $2 million on the budget, right? We can, like, I don't understand how we can like quantify what you're asking us to do.
So looking at, for example, the cut in staff and the impact and the negative impact that got, I think we've actually approached this from the wrong lens, because we've talked about the people at the windows who are no longer there, so the windows were closed. Maybe we need to have fewer windows that are staffed longer with people who can answer more questions. That's so easy for me to say, because that's the kind of thing you get to after a year of training, cross-training, getting more people, systems integrated. But if you want to take people out in a way that doesn't reduce the impact of the town, you don't talk about the number of like people at the windows. You reduce the number of windows and have more people at them over time. We talked about the fire department and like what happens if we go from 6 minutes to 8 minutes. We can do that testing right now because not everybody is the same distance from the fire department. So we do have calls that take 8 minutes and calls that take 1 minute. What's the value impact on both of them? But we're a small town and that's hard to do. And that would be a burden on our fire chief to have to worry about parsing out the data. But there are ways we can tackle some of these questions that are at our fingertips if we just think about coming at them a little differently, for example.
So I was just going to add, actually, I want to clarify. We're not talking about an audit capacity here. I think it's extremely important for any group to introspect, to define the value map. There's no conflict of interest there because you are the ones that are proposing the cuts for your own budgets in the first place. So it's imperative that you must create some sort of value map with a standardized definition of value. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice that we're a small town and therefore we cannot identify what that value definition should be, depending upon the service. And in fact, the fire department, you brought up the response time, which I love. The fact that distance can have an impact on response time may not be as pertinent to when we're looking at other factors, mainly budgetary cuts and their impact on response time. So I think it's extremely important for that framework to sort of start being embedded in the analysis, because previously, when I was not a member of this board, the immediate question that came to me as I was looking at the school data was, there's no clarity here, there's no visibility, and I cannot understand what is justifying the decision-making around why these budget cuts happen. It seems to, at that time, I thought, it seems to me it's easy enough to go after staff because that's what everybody does. But has there been a rigorous evaluation performed? And it's not a burden, I would go so far as to say, neither on the fire chief nor anybody else, for the following reason. Is it not a greater burden to cut your own budget and perhaps more excessively than you need to, rather than the burden of analysis? That's what I say. So I think it's important.
I would say, I agree. I would say that from the school side, I can say that's an ever-happening thing. There's always, the idea is to maximize efficiencies, and I think that is being done on a daily basis, even when she's talking about what plans she can engage in order to consolidate classrooms and do what she can. I certainly would not want our superintendent's attention being taken away from her primary job to be, providing the standard of education that we all accept, to then start delving into these large research projects about efficiencies, frankly. That's how I feel. I do think that absent a glaring inefficiency, I don't think that that's what we, expect of her, nor, I mean, what we are here to do is provide the education that we have promised and what we would all want. And so to look at it from the lens of the budget first is, I don't think the school's philosophy is to provide the education. And then when we have the ability to, make cuts that would not impact that standard of education, it should be done and it will be done. But I don't like looking at it from the other side.
I think I'm only saying that, there are opportunities here where these gross cuts on staff may potentially be avoided if we just take a closer look at the value and the outcomes being brought about by the respective, services, capabilities. That's all I'm saying.
Well, if
And
you have any specific-
unfortunately, because you have the greater burden of cutting the staff in the first place, would you rather bear the burden of cutting staff because you feel that you may not have the bandwidth to do the analysis, or maybe a couple of hours on the analysis is preferable versus, removing, whatever the big cuts need to be performed on whatever.
But part of that challenge, I think, is that, as she noted, 81% of our budget is staff. So it's the huge chunk of our budget, it's people. And so that would be sort of where you would look first. In the smaller percentage, you can certainly try and find places, but I think that you're gonna find that you'd still end up impacting staff no matter what.
Yeah,
I think I would like to comment that the anchor of the school system is the quality of education that has taken us 20 years to build. And as Allison said, if we make a catastrophic decision that removes people who are doing the job, the kids will not be educated at the same level as they were before. So the important thing is everything that people have said today right here, but there are actual drivers in the system where people want to get paid a fair salary in order to be able to live. And if we look at inflation month over month, those numbers are killers. And so the idea that somehow or another budgets in this town won't increase any more than 2%, it's unrealistic in our environment and with inflation driving as they are. So the more important thing is to use a rational method as to how we judge what the quality of each department is and what our deliverables are. I believe our deliverables in the school system are that our kids are educated to a level where they can compete in our society anywhere in the United States and earn a decent living. And I think, at least from what I've seen of what we've delivered for each kid that graduates, we've done that, and we want to continue to do that. And so from that point of view, everything else is on the table, but I will never give up on that goal.
So I think it's always important, and love new ideas in terms of how do we look at things differently than we have before. So I do want to acknowledge that part of the conversation. What I'm going to say is probably much lower hanging fruit, but I would like the town side, can't speak to the school side, but Allison, you're here, so you're hearing it. How are we looking at AI and technology to address, Ian gave an example of, highly paid staff taking minutes. That's ridiculous in this day and age, right? So how do we use technology to help with some of the staffing challenges that we have? So I'll just put that out there for consideration, not looking for an answer. And then one of the other items that was part of the select board's goals is to look at, are there redundancies in costs between town and school? And I think that, I don't know what it is there, and just call it what it is. There's a lot of territorial stuff going on, like when we get into that conversation, but I think we owe it to the taxpayers to have that honest conversation about it, understanding there are jurisdictions, I get that, but jurisdictions aside, we have a charge as elected boards to answer those questions to our taxpayers. So I would ask that these two respective boards, school and select board, pursue that goal in earnest to have that. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe it's a lot of work for there's just not a lot. But, again, I trust our professionals, but purchasing, are we making purchasing in bulk and, are we all buying the same paper towels? I don't know, right? Are we all buying our technology from the same and getting that benefit? Understanding we have different systems and privacy and students and all that, but like equipment, I mean, there have to be some opportunities given the size of these budgets. I fail to understand that there isn't. And what I think we've had historically is a lack of willingness on the part of both parties to do that. And so I would like to see that changed.
I think that's possible, and in fact, we've had that discussion a number of times relative to buying paper and other supplies for the schools. We have a collaborative, and in fact, the collaborative is how many towns? 34 towns, I think, Allison, somewhere up in that number. And we jointly buy bulk in that amount of paper and supplies for the school system by using the power of the purchasing power of the collaborative. And in other cases where there's a difference between what we actually do versus what we say we do, in other words, technology between the town side and our side, is slightly different, and certainly our goal has to be that our system has to work all the time. Otherwise, the kids don't get what they're supposed to get during the day. But I think we've had that general discussion before, and we've sought out ways to make it work. And I think Allison actually had a program last year where we have something you don't have, and that's an HR director. But the bottom
We have an
line
HR director.
Pardon?
We do have an HR director.
Yeah. So with all due respect, Steve, I think we've sort of.
Agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of thrown some pebbles in the pond, and we've seen a few little ripples, but we haven't really dug in as, dedicated members of a subset of the boards to really dig in and have that conversation. And I mean this no disrespect to, let's say, someone in purchasing, but if we have purchasing, let's say the schools have 3 people in purchasing, the town have 2. I don't know, maybe we need 5 people, but could we do with 2 people, one, this tier, and then another person, like, I don't know, but that's a conversation we should be having, because that is, we see the salary side on both school and town, and the only way we're gonna get at the true tax reductions is to look at this a little bit more holistically. I certainly don't want to change the education performance and.
I don't disagree with you. I think all you have to say is who's going to put that plan on the table so that we can do the evaluation and see how it works.
Well,
There's another body involved, I think, to look at both sides and make a, make a proposal.
Christy, wasn't there?
I don't think she's going to like it much.
That's what we agreed.
Okay, so that's an important, so Ian just said that there was a federal government and that dried up.
There was a grant that there was a grant that would fund exactly what we're doing. We talked about it between the boards, and that was kind of our decision to come back and use a independent company that knew what they were doing. Then, we had chair and vice chair looking at this and started the discussion last year. Looking at Sarah's.
Yeah, and I think irrespective of the labor that it takes, the deliverable for both sides has to stay the same.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
So I honestly, I'm a little frustrated with this way the conversation's gone, because I feel like we're here tonight not to talk about a $500 increase or a $1,000 increase. I mean, everybody here would love to see taxes go down. I think that's, safe for me to say. But what we're here to figure out is what direction do we want to give the administration? Do we want them to do level funded? Do we want them to do level service? Do we want them to put back some services? Again, I don't know what the answer is, but until we give them that direction, right? I mean, it's a good thing we started early, because we now have to, I feel like we have to ask them to do that little extra introspection that they've never done before to find the value related proposal that will all of a sudden sprinkle my magic dust, save everybody money. I feel like that has already been done. And it's presented every year to the select board, to the school committee, to the AFC, and to town meeting. And town meeting makes the decision. Like, none of us actually approves the budget, right? We make recommendations on the budget, but town meeting votes on it. So I'm just a little confused as to the idea that there's money to be saved um, that, that our staff hasn't found already. So,
Well, I would just say that, obviously, we come back, we get our budgets at the end of the year, and if level funded is 4% increase, okay. If level funded is 8% increase, then those are different conversations, right? That's what we don't know. Level service, pardon me, level service, thank you for correcting me, sorry. Just threw off a lot of people, all right. And I think one of the things that's challenging is a lot of us I came through the Advisory Finance Committee, and a lot of us come from business backgrounds, and so we look at things from a business perspective. And you want to run the town as a business, right? But it doesn't quite fit that model. So there are things you just aren't really going to change, right? If this was a business, we would have moved everything online, right? And we would lose customers, but we would take those savings and it would offset that. We can't lose customers, right? We're serving everybody in town. So there are things we look at that unfortunately, as business folks, we would do that really aren't opportunities. And so, which, that's how it is. I think right, it all depends on what we're looking at when it comes to December, and we all go pick up our binders and we start to do our review. I do think the town and the schools come with what they believe is level funded to the best of their level service.
Just test to see if we're all listening.
Yes, exactly. You win. We're going to come back and we're going to start doing that exercise when we all get together in January. I don't think anybody here wants level funded. We want level service. When we come back and we get that, and depending on what it looks like, then we try and look for opportunities. And I would say for folks who this might be their first meeting, whatever comes to us in December isn't necessarily what's voted on in March, right? Things do change during that time period. Every department comes before you and discusses what they're looking for, what they've asked for, what they need, and then decisions are made and changes are made. And so these estimates are wrong, right? Because they're estimates, so we know they're wrong. But we're going to do a lot of that analysis. And maybe there are some changes to the way we do that this year that would be helpful. I do also find that we have this meeting and we kind of go round and round. And then we all just come back in December and start to do the work. So thank you for level service.
I'd just like to say, for me, I like the idea of level service with an asterisk, which is, and much like we already do, but we need to be constantly looking for services that aren't as popular or as needed. At the same time that we add new services, I look at what the rec department's doing now that we have that building over there in terms of number of opportunities for people to participate. I don't have a number, she probably does, but it's, to me, it seems like there's 5 times more stuff going on. Just in the opposite way as last year when you reorganized some of the teachers, and even before we did the 1% thing, there was changes in staffing because of things were different. I know the town looks at those things too. I think it's, I can't come up with a magic number that makes sense. I think it makes more sense to look at what you want to have and then try and see where you have to compromise or delay or do this or do that. So back to your original value proposition, I would come in the first one as my recommendation.
So I think Walter stole my line here. I think we're all looking at the level service budget, but I think a lot of the discussion that we had here was around what can we do and what responsibility we have in front of the town to make it as much optimized budget as possible. So I like this conversation, and I like the ideas that were voiced here on both sides. And I think this is our responsibility to look into it. And the reality is we will be in December, we will look at what the budget is going to be, and nobody will like the number. So I'm glad we have this discussion today, so we can prepare for this and we don't impose 1% arbitrary cut as we did last year. That's just to add to what Walter said.
Yeah, I think I would agree as well, and just, I mean, I think level service, to simplify it, level service, but highlighting the look for efficiencies, and I think we've talked about that, and I do think that we've had a really good conversation here of some ideas and some things, new things to take away. I think, I thought we already did it, I'm probably wrong, but going back and looking at our dashboard communities and doing, Terry, what you said, and looking and say, here's where their kind of budget allocations are, similar to what was shown on that other slide there that we've done for the town, and said, okay, so we're putting, X percent in schools and X percent in fire and X percent in this and that, and comparing and seeing, okay, are we doing something that no other town's doing? I don't think we are, but let's look at that. Are we putting, 20% more into landfill than anybody else is, and maybe we need to do something different. So I think that's a good exercise. I think tightening it up, I think we've done, as the town manager said, in the budget books, and the school has done as well, is talked about the value proposition. I think taking a look and tightening that up and really looking at, are there ways and metrics? And I think getting some advice and views from the advisory finance committee would be great. I look at you guys as advising all of us, and the town looks at you that way as well, so helping with that. So I think it's, I personally think level service with a focus on efficiencies, which I do believe we continue to do, but then tightening up the message so everyone understands that this is why level service makes sense, is because this is the value, this is the metric, and this is, impacts on changes.
Yeah, so I guess, my frustration is unfounded in the sense that I feel like I owe you guys a little bit of an apology because the AFC is responsible for looking at all of this and making sure that the administration is efficient. But I also feel like, you've got the fire chief looking at regionalizing services to save money. You've got the administration collaborating with RTA, and I can't really give an example for the schools, but I'm sure there's things that the schools are doing to save money. And so I do feel like that process is ongoing. And really what we're here today is to try and figure out, do we want level funded? Do we want level service? Do we, again, I keep saying that, like, we can't put the cart before the horse and say, we only want a $500 tax increase, or we only want a decrease, whatever. We can't do that tonight until we give them some direction as to which way to go.
Yeah, and I don't think, and that was not my point at all when I was trying to make it. It was more around, if you have like, in presenting it or looking at your own department, right? You're looking at, and if I get the directive level service, then I should also be asked, what else am I doing to drive more efficiency? How can I do things better or differently with either more or less people? And I may want more people to drive, an initiative that will actually drive savings eventually. And those are things that you want to flesh out during the budgeting process. My fear is, what you described last year is you go with a level service, and it's going to blow in our face in December, and the thing is going to be, a 10% increase. I'm just making up a number, a number that we just can't think we can afford. Then we have to go back in, or I think select board has to go back through and go through a whole big gyration. And I think that was your point too, is how do you eliminate that from happening, right? And it's hard to say what is the number. It's probably a range, a percentage. What is the right number?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that right number is until we start looking at what the budget is going to be and how much, you know, Sean said, if it's 8% higher, well, maybe we have some hard decisions to make. Or if it's 15% higher, then we have some really hard decisions to make. I don't mean to make light of it because it's a serious topic, but when I look, like, for example, your question about the benchmark communities, the science behind how those were selected includes percentage of education as a total, of the total budget, percentage of municipal safety as a total budget. So we're, yeah, like the score, the potential score was 205 and the highest one was 159. So no town really scored a 205 where they're identical to Westborough. But, you know, I do think that those communities give us an idea. And I understand your point about trying to say, okay, if this town is spending, you know, this town scored X, Y, Z, and they're spending $2 million a year less on fire, how are they doing that? Well, are they an on-call or, you know, I mean, I don't know what, but we need to maybe look at that and see if there is some drastic savings that another town is doing that we haven't looked at yet.
And I'm
I
just
think
looking
that's a
at it
good.
as my responsibility to the townspeople, right? Because that's who I'm reporting to, is to say this, at the end of the day, we're asking you to sign off on this budget and this tax rate. And that's what I want to feel comfortable with.
Right.
That's at the end of this exercise.
I agree with that 100%.
Right, and then how do we best give you, you know, planning advice as you go through this process of trying to eke this out of your process without making it more cumbersome, but maybe it's more of a tops-down kind of directive or analysis, scenario planning that you can do that maybe can highlight and focus it. That's all I was trying to focus on.
So I'd just like to add a few words. I mean, I don't have background in business or finances, but our goal here is to reduce the burden on the residents, and we're only talking about the services and the potential cuts of services because we want to reduce that burden. But there are other ways to change that number, right? We can increase the revenue or look where, I mean, the money is not just coming from the residential taxes. And I feel like we're not having this conversation. I would like to see the comparison with the benchmark towns, where that money is coming from in other towns and how we're doing compared to them, because that's a potential to decrease the burden on the residents without reducing the level of services.
What?
Cherry sheets.
Oh, cherry sheets.
Just looking at those will tell us what the distribution is relative to all the things that the state reviews. Grade relative to each town. All they do under the state's criteria. Our free cash is funded by virtue of the returns from the monies that are given to the town relative to schools.
That's not true.
That's not true.
It's not true at all, Steve. We've been through this before.
How much? About 12 million comes from?
No, 12 million goes to keep the tax rate where it is. None of that goes to free cash. All of that is considered when we're looking at the revenues, the non-levy revenues that go to reduce the tax rate and set up the budgeting of the town. The budget of the town's $150 million. Until we get $150 million to this, from the state, none of it goes to free cash. But to answer your question more directly, those numbers, those two lines are in the consideration for those benchmark communities. We do two things. We consider state aid as a percentage of the budget, and we do the levy, so the real estate tax as a percent of the levy, and in converse, that takes into account the non-real estate or state aid. So those were factors that went into that, of the 15 criteria.
So you're saying that the new town comparisons includes all of that stuff as well?
Yes.
So.
Yes, state aid is one of the characteristics, and the levy as a percent of the total budget is a characteristic, as well as the total non-tax percent of the levy of the budget, sorry.
So that metric is already there, and that's why we have the new, in effect,
Yeah.
criteria.
There were 15 different criteria, and I tried to really think a lot about these things and weigh things like the fire department, police. What are all the categories, the biggest drivers of these expenditures in the budget? What are the big categories, whether it be DPW, general government, schools? And so we look to create them through affordability and a look at that through that lens, as Christy explained previously. And by looking at that slide, you can see it puts us in the top 3 relative to that factor in comparison. If you want to compare any one of those minutia, you're going to get a different result. But if you just look at the change in taxes over that period of time, yeah, we're in the top 3.
So a couple closing remarks on my end. So like Ian and Sean, I'm not sure, Mark, where you're landing on this. I would be in favor of a level service as sort of where we're heading out of the gates. I haven't heard consistency across AFC. I haven't heard from anyone sort of where you're landing, and I'd love to hear from the school committee on the same, because I'm just not sure kind of what the direction is out of this meeting for both town and school. I want to push back a little bit on something that Mark said in specifically, and I have full trust in what our superintendent and the town manager and all respective entities under are coming forward with. The level of professionalism, as you said, Andrew, is exceptional in this town. Having said that, when we came back and we had those conversations last year and we said we need 1%, let's give it a squeeze here, we found 1%. And so I think there's a little bit of like trust and verify for me. Like that to me is the same charge. I'm not saying go and cut 1%. I'm saying level services, and I don't know if it would be level service and a percent not to exceed relative to the last couple of years. I don't know what that number is, and I don't even know that that makes sense as it's escaping from my mouth, but conceptually, it's, at the end of the day, I just don't believe, I don't hear from taxpayers, I want less. I want to pay less, but I don't want less. And, and we can get into disagreements around, renovations and whatever the case may be, but those ships have sailed. So no one wants less, they just want to pay less, and that's not how it works. It just doesn't work that way. We've talked about the economy, we've talked about inflation. So level service, perhaps a percent not to exceed would be kind of my thought. And great point on the commercial element, because I do think that that's a part that's not part of this conversation of what are we doing to bring big business here to really drive down the tax rate in a measurable way over a sustained time. So thank you.
So I am supportive of the level service option, but like all of us, I think we continue to pursue cost-saving measures. My point was more that when I look to somebody to find a cost-saving measure, I can come up with a few out-of-the-box ideas for increasing, no, that's who I am, but for increasing revenue or, saving us money, and maybe they're good ideas, maybe they're not, but when it comes right down to it, I have a lot more faith in Christy and Pat and Todd and the staff goes on and on because we do have good people in place, and because when we tell them we need to save some money and cut 1%, they did find a way to do that. But let's be clear, that was not a level service budget because some services were cut with that 1%. So if we get to this point in 3 months and the level service budget is not palatable, we may be back in that same situation. I don't know, but I just want to leave them with a direction as to what we as a group are expecting them to come up with in the next couple of months. And that would be, in my opinion, level service.
I think from the schools, I could probably say that moving forward with that methodology works, where we would be moving towards a level services budget with, an analysis of efficiencies, basically trying to maximize that. So, which I agree with Mark that that's an ongoing thing. I understand what you're saying, Shelby. I also feel that if we were charged with having to reduce the 2%, we would have found it. We just would not be in a good place. So it's about what we value in terms of whether or not we want to provide the services, continue to provide the services that we have, or if we want to cut. And it's sort of in that balance. So I think that I can speak for the school committee where I think we would want to proceed with the level services budget and try and find efficiencies where we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just, I think everybody in the room knows it here, but I love to say it because I think from residents and people watching tonight or that will go back and watch it, and as many of us know, a lot of people in town do watch what Westborough TV puts out there. It's surprising how many people tell me that I'm losing hair in the back of my head, which is the problem with the camera in town hall, but it's another. But just to be clear, and I think Advisory Finance Committee, a lot of us came through that before other positions, and it's great to see this group here. But for the town to realize kind of the roles we each play, and it's very important because so many people ask us, well, what are you doing? What are you at the select board doing about the schools? And I said, we're not doing anything about the schools besides working with our fellow elected representatives and our residents on this, but we do not have control over the schools. School committee does. We don't have control. I can't go to Allison and tell her to do anything, and that's not our role. You have the great thing that you really are kind of, as we're elected by the residents here and the taxpayers. You're an appointed thing, but the town and the town meeting really looks to the Advisory Finance Committee as that voice truly representing them. Yes, we represent them, we're elected, but they look at you from that budgetary standpoint to do the work you're doing, so I appreciate that. Keep doing it, but also for the townspeople to realize that, we each have roles to play. And the other elected body, library trustees, we don't control the library. The school does not control the library trustees do. The planning board, similar thing. So just, there are roles and responsibilities, but at the end of the day, and why we're having this meeting and why it's a tri-board, is that we're all here representing the residents of Westborough, and we're trying to do the best for them. But also, I know for us, and I know for the school committee, our job is to stay in the lane that we have responsibility for and not to step over that. You have the nice piece of really looking at everything in total. To that point, though, I commend Christy, Allison, and their staff, because I know they work really close together and talk all the time, and they're working hard to do what's best and bring each of, us that they report to that information, but I know behind the scenes that they are doing that work of collaboration and really working together. I just wanted to get that out there as well. I guess, I don't know that we've heard fully from the Advisory Finance Committee. I guess we've heard school and select board on kind of level service, looking for efficiency and some of this other stuff. And we've heard from a couple, but not a majority. Are we okay? Are there other thoughts? That's really, again, it's a tri-board meeting, so if there are other thoughts or recommendations, love to hear it.
I was just trying to see if anybody else has an opinion that hasn't spoke, but I think most.
I would just say that both other groups have put a position forward that kind of is similar, the qualified level services or level services with an asterisk. So if we can stand behind that, because we're the ones who are going to represent the budget, is that something we would generally agree with? We don't even have to be unanimous, but is that a position we can take? Or maybe we just don't vote at all on it?
I don't know that I don't know that we would vote on it. I think we've all talked about the different things we'd want to see, from either value propositions to breakdowns, a little bit more of where the services are going. I don't think this needs to be the end of the conversation either. I would endorse level service, but at the same time, I do think that looking to dashboard communities or seeing where we may be spending less or more than other comparable communities is not predictive or dispositive that we're doing a good or bad thing, but it does point to areas where we might want to focus more. There's no way for me to say, going back to if 2% is the right number or 5% is 10%. But when a number comes up, we also need to be able to justify what that number is. So I'm happy to take a vote, but I don't know that it's my opinion would be to start with level service and, hopefully stay in tighter communication, maybe, if that's the best way to put it, so that before December gets here, we can ask the appropriate questions, which I know we'll be discussing the next couple meetings.
The only thing I wanted to add, though, is I love the idea of also including a look at revenue, because it is two ends of the spectrum. And as a topic, I don't know we've ever really addressed it. I don't know what other towns are doing. So what does that look like? Renting out space for weddings or what have you. I don't know. Like what are other people doing? So I'd love to have an informed perspective. Because John's not busy enough.
Just maybe a question back to Christy and John. Is there something else that you would appreciate to get in terms of direction to make your jobs easier as you roll this whole thing up?
I mean, to be really honest, I think that what you're describing as what you're asking for, we feel like is how we budget every year. And if we haven't, and it sounds like we can do a better job explaining the efficiencies that we're reviewing and how we're reviewing, and we've tried. I think we can look at it in a different approach, but I think what we had hoped wouldn't happen is that, certainly we understand that we can't just sort of be given, blanket to like an undesirable double-digit % increase. Like, we understand that, but I think what Allison and I have talked about is having like a little bit of direction as to what feels like good fiscal management is something that, if we were going to, we would rather hear for that now if we can, than sort of have to go through this exercise in January. But I think, going back to what everyone seems to be agreeing to, I think that that's how we budget, and we can communicate that, at least I know on both sides, we can communicate that as efficiently as possible.
That's what I'm hearing, though, is that if you can communicate how you get those value decisions made, the AFC at least, and even the select board and the school committee may have some ideas on, that you don't have that would save the town money. So I think that's what the AFC is asking, is that maybe if you can communicate better how you arrived at this number for this budget item, again, it's a time-consuming process, so I don't know how much time we're talking to do that communication, but I understand, I think, what you're asking from the administration.
I think it's a shared goal of staff as well as these three committees to bring forward a responsible budget. So none of us are afraid of answering the questions or communicating, the process that we've gone through. I appreciate that we all start from a place of understanding that there really just isn't a lot of extra. That doesn't mean that there aren't services that you would want to understand better as to whether or not they should continue.
I only control one board, but anything else? If not,
Motion to adjourn.
on behalf of the select board, vote. The select board is adjourned.
Motion to adjourn.
Bradley, second.
All in favor?
Make a motion to adjourn.
AFC is adjourned.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Adjourn. Thank you. He's really good. So a lot of.